What's up, YouTube? On this episode of Coddiwomple Overland, we're going to be doing the whole Smokey Mountain 1000. The Smokey Mountain 1000 is a nearly 1,100-mile loop that goes through Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. It was originally built as a dual sport route, but virtually any four-wheel drive can do it. It's made up of Forest Service roads, secondary blacktop two-lane roads, and occasional dirt roads sprinkled in. This route took us about 6 months to do over the course of several trips. Deb and I left eastern Kentucky and headed toward the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee. Our plan was a 6-day excursion that followed generally along the Smokey Mountain 1000. We got on the Smokey Mountain 1000 in Hampton, Tennessee, and then headed clockwise. It wasn't long at all before we were gaining elevation along the twisty mountain road. The next thing we knew, we were entering the Cherokee National Forest. Shortly after entering the forest, we found gravel road. We traveled along it for a little bit, but it was getting late. It was time to start looking for a campsite. As luck would have it, the first Forest Service road spur that we took led us to a great camp spot. After setting up camp, it was time to fix supper. This will be the first of many incredible meals of the trip. While we sat around for the evening just before bed, we discussed just how loud this little creek was. We knew we were going to have to do some exploring after breakfast the following morning before we left. We knew that these two little waterfalls couldn't be what was making all the noise. After breakfast, it was time for a short hike. The short hike was only about 50 feet before we found our first surprise. This is what was making all of the noise. We climbed to the top to get a different view. What we found when we got there was another set of falls. We found out later that this area was called Twin Falls. This little trail didn't just have the Twin Falls. Above those Twin Falls, it actually had many, many other sets of falls, apparently going all the way to the top of the mountain. After our hike, it was time to get on the trail and continue our adventure. And the adventure didn't take long to continue.
So how are we going to get out of here? We're going to have to winch that
Yeah, we'll
big
move
rock.
it out of the way.
Shit.
Well,
What a day.
good start. So we put a plan together to winch the big rock out of the way. We thought we could get around the rest of them. After the biggest rock was moved, we could get around the rest of them pretty easily. You know, we always think in overlanding about recovery and being out there by ourselves. These rocks fell overnight, and we were on the end of a one-way in and one-way out trail. There wasn't any cell service in this area, and the only communication we had with the outside world was ham radio. In this particular scenario, a set of traction boards would not help at all. You really need a winch, or at the very least a come along in your arsenal to be able to get out of a situation like this. After extricating ourselves from the rock fall, it was time to get on the trail again.
I don't have much, but I guess I have enough to get that through.
Not too far from where we spent the night, we came upon Elk River Falls. Not far out of Elk River Falls, we hit Blacktop and headed toward Grandfather Mountain. Just after the entrance to Grandfather Mountain, we found another gravel road. This gravel road would give us some pretty epic views of Grandfather Mountain, and it also led us to Forest Service Road 192. That's Grandfather Mountain. Forest Service Road 192 is not part of the Smokey Mountain 1000. However, it definitely should be. It is 11 miles of single lane dirt road. It does have a little bit of washouts, some minor technical areas, but it was really, really pretty and just enough obstacles to make it a whole lot of fun. We met another overlanding couple while we were on the trail. They told us about where they had camped the night before and said that it would be a great place to have lunch. So we decided to check it out. I decided to cook lunch today. It was Philly cheesesteak. After lunch, we hung around here for a few minutes just to enjoy the creek. And then it was time to get back on the trail. As Trail 92 was coming to an end, we were hoping we were going to find many more of these types of Forest Service roads. We popped back out onto a gravel forest road. It was very scenic.
The whole thing is, I could see the road right there.
We passed several old log cabins and homesteads.
Are there big fish in there?
And it seemed like waterfalls were around every turn. The weather was given a chance of rain, but so far it couldn't have been better for us. The last part of the day was a short piece of blacktop. As day 2 came to an end, we found a campsite at Brown Mountain OHV area. It was a free campsite that was primitive, but it was really nice and quiet. We set up camp, fixed steaks over the campfire, and enjoyed the rest of the evening.
That's a lot of food. Morning.
The next morning was steak, egg and cheese, bagels, and coffee for breakfast. After we packed up camp, it was time to hit the road. About 10 miles from where we camped at Brown Mountain, we came across this stream and several dispersed camping sites. Just goes to show you never know what's going to be around the next corner. We could have made it here last night with ease and been able to camp right beside this awesome stream. You just never know. Right at the end of the awesome campsites was a road closed sign right in the middle of nowhere. It was time to turn around and look for a detour. If you've watched any of our videos before, you'll know detours are where we find some of the coolest stuff. This one was no different. We ended up in a place called Wilson Creek, and it was absolutely incredible. Wilson Creek is a 23-mile mountain stream that was added to the National Wild and Scenic River System in 2000. It starts at the top of Grandfather Mountain, and in just 20 miles it turns into this, rushing water through a granite gorge. We couldn't get over how clean and crystal clear the water was. We had no idea that the little stream that we had lunch by the day before would turn into such a magnificent stream. There were several places along this road to stop, get out and get down to the creek and enjoy the water. One thing we're always on the lookout for is wildlife. This trip didn't yield a whole lot. We were able to see these little critters here.
There's 3 of them. See them running?
4 of them.
Oh, 4.
It's a mama and baby. It's not just the nature that's interesting on these trips. Sometimes you end up in little communities like this one. This is Edgemont. It's a small fishing community right along the Wilson Creek. It's like stepping back in time. Visitor parking here. Wilson Creek. I wonder if it's open. Once we got through Edgemont, it was back onto the Mountain Forest Service roads.
You know, it's like solid.
After filling the gas tank in the cooler, it was time to get back on the road. There's always a cool place to camp. This was just a dispersed campsite along the Forest Service gravel road. By this point, we were trying to make our way to Table Rock, which is on the east side of the Limbo Gorge. We've been extremely lucky with the weather, but our luck just ran out. By the time we made it to the parking lot at Table Rock, the rain had slacked off a little bit, but it was still too cloudy. You couldn't see anything. We decided not to make the hike, and it was time to get back on the road again. On this section of the trail, we kept seeing signs for a bear sanctuary. We were really hoping to see one, just didn't pan out. By this time, we had talked to Alan and Nancy. They were on their way to meet us and follow along for the rest of the trip. The plan was to meet on the north end of the Limbo Gorge. While we were on our way, it was our job to stop and look for the perfect campsite for the night. I think we may have found it on the first one. The route we were taking to get to the north end of the gorge was the old North Carolina Highway 105. While the clouds gave the view a different perspective, I'm sure the view from here would have been stunning without clouds. Gotta love North Carolina highways.
Yeah.
After we made it off North Carolina 105 in Linville, we met Alan and Nancy. We then made our way back across Linville Gorge to the first campsite that we found. We set up to a beautiful sunset and was really hoping for an even more incredible sunrise. Dinner that night was ham, green beans, and potatoes, and you had to love the cornbread. We had a great night's sleep at Linville Gorge. We woke up on day 4 hoping for an amazing sunrise, but what we found was we were still in the clouds. After breakfast, we packed up and headed out. We were all anxious to see what today's adventure would bring. Our first stop was the short hike down to the Linville Falls, and man, was it worth it. Before we could make our way back to the parking area, it started raining, and it would rain like this for the rest of the morning.
Oh wow, that was cool. Did you see that?
Yeah. I don't think I got it, but I seen it.
That was magnificent.
Trained eye and ENT doctors who are experts in treating all parts of the face. Call 703.
This road led us into the Black Mountain area and eventually back up to the Blue Ridge Parkway, getting closer and closer to Mount Mitchell. Look at there, Forest Service gate that's open. We seemed to find more Forest Service gates that were closed than were open on this
that's
trip.
pretty.
Next thing we knew, we were out on the Parkway. We're literally in the clouds.
Yeah.
Mount Mitchell. You can't see him. We were hoping to get a view of the highest peak east of the Mississippi. Just wasn't happening today.
Just not a lot to see today.
The clouds were finally opening up, and we got a chance to see Glass Mine Falls.
Yeah.
While the Blue Ridge Parkway is obviously blacktop, it does offer some absolutely amazing views.
That's pretty. It's not a whole lot of there.
The sun got to come out just enough to heat things up. That's when we found ourselves in a weather phenomenon that was really, really cool to watch. After the weather show, it wouldn't be long and we found ourselves back on gravel roads.
Yay, we're back on dirt. So pretty through here. Watch out.
This road crossed several little mountain streams. We were hoping to find one that we could camp next to tonight. We found a really good site, but we had to clean it up a little bit before we could set up camp. Nancy and Alan's down there trying to find them the perfect camp spot. I think all in all, we've done pretty good. This site was right off Forest Service Road 63, and I think it was probably my favorite one of the trip. After setting up camp, it was time to dip our toes in the crystal clear water.
there is this is mica garnet schist, and there is the garnet. And these flakes are the mica. And it's all through there. There was a bigger one I dug out.
I have one.
There's another garnet.
After dinner, we cleaned up dishes and just hung out and enjoyed each other's company by the fire in the stream for the rest of the evening. On day 4, we woke up to pretty steady rain. We had breakfast real quick and decided to get on the trail as soon as we could. While the rain was not super hard, it was still steady enough that you didn't want to be outside. We spent most of this morning traveling the back roads just north of Asheville, making our way towards the town. As we climbed in elevation, we quickly realized the only views we were going to see today were of the clouds.
We won't be able to see anything today.
By the time we got to Asheville, we had decided to hit I-40 and start making our way back around towards our beginning near Johnson City, Tennessee. That decision also enabled us to hit Hurricane Creek and Max Patch on this trip. With a fairly abrupt turn off of I-40, we had made it to Hurricane Creek. The first part of it seemed more like a gravel road or a driveway up until you got to the houses. Then it started getting a little better. Not far past the houses, we found a couple campsites. We decided to have lunch here before we continued the expedition. As soon as we finished lunch and got back on the trail, the fun started. This was the first of a few creek crossings. None of them were very deep, but you did have to pick your way through the rocks. We started to encounter a few mud holes at this point. So far, nothing that a regular four-wheel drive couldn't do.
So this is just an old, like, wagon ride maybe?
Yeah, that's what I would say it is. By this point, we started getting into some rocks and some washouts. This is an area that if you didn't have very much articulation, you could definitely pick a wheel up off the ground. And then we found this. Uh-oh. You want to stay in through this sticky mess?
No.
I would stay on your side. Let me just come pick you up. She's gonna mess up right here. Nope, she made it. Notice her line selection and balance are improving. This mud was incredibly slick, and a lot of people had thrown pieces of timber or whatever else in these ruts trying to build them up. That's why I was taking my time to make sure that nothing kicked up underneath the undercarriage of the Jeep. Alan and Nancy done fine through this section. They did rub a little bit, but their 2-inch AEV lift and 34-inch tires, they did fine. A lot of people think sway bar disconnects are just for articulation. It's for ride comfort as well. Notice what little bit our Jeep moves around there while the suspension does all the work. When Alan and Nancy come through, look how rigid their suspension is. It's all got to do with the sway bar disconnect. There are several water crossings, like I said earlier, but again, none of them are very deep or difficult. This trail being like all others, you never know what you're going to see. Yep, we found the magic school bus.
Everything's so slippery.
The further up the creek we went, the narrower the trail got and the bigger the rocks became. You definitely had to pick your line here, and even with a little bit larger tires and lift, you're still going to scrape your frame from time to time on that. As we started to make our ascent further up to the head of the creek, you can tell that this trail had been here for a long time. The rocks on the uphill side and the trail degradation there on the low side definitely made for an off-camber situation. If you weren't comfortable with your rig, it definitely make you pinch up a little bit. This is an area where disconnected sway bars are a disadvantage because you have a tendency to have a downhill lean. Video doesn't do the off-camber here justice. And the other side of it is right off the road there, it was about 20 or 30 feet straight down. And just when we thought we were out of Hurricane Creek and back on the gravel road, we found this fun section here. Alan and Nancy picked an alternate line, but still ended up picking up a tire a couple times. This will be the last obstacle coming out of Hurricane Creek. The ruts there are about 1 foot to 1.5 foot deep. We didn't get any footage of the orange deep coming through. Here you can see Alan and Nancy splitting the ruts to try to stay out of them.
Good job.
After we left Hurricane Creek, it was off to Max Patch. Max Patch is a bald mountaintop along the Tennessee-North Carolina border, and its elevation is just over 4,600 feet. Although the low clouds kept some of the peaks from showing themselves, it was still a pretty cool view from up here. The top of this mountain is a major landmark for the Appalachian Trail and is a pretty popular stayover for the AT thru hikers. There's a 2.4-mile loop trail that goes around Max Patch. Shows you a little bit of everything about it. We really enjoyed the hike and be able to get out and stretch our legs. By the time we left Max Patch, it was time to start looking for a campsite for the night. This actually was Martha's Sunquest State Forest. We had stumbled into the back way to it. All of these sites were set up as primitive and free. After setting up camp at another incredible campsite, it was time for dinner. Deb made jambalaya. We got on the trail pretty quick. We knew this was going to be our last day of exploring before we had to take the long drive home this evening.
There's 5.
We continued the loop through Martha's Sunquest Forest before we made our way back up to the top of the mountain near Max Patch.
I guess 8 years, 7 years, something.
We've passed a lot more dual sport bikes than we have Jeeps. But this Smokey Mountain 1000, it was built and advertised as a dual sport route. Hot Springs. After you leave Martha Sunquist and cross the ridge, you make your way down into the community of Hot Springs.
A lot of air.
You never know what you're going to find on these adventures. Nancy found a random peach tree just growing beside the road.
Somebody's thrown a peach out 20 years ago.
We had to stop and pick a few of them, but they weren't quite ripe yet.
Need to stop at a little roadside stand and get some peaches because that just made me want to have some peaches.
Before we met up with you on Wednesday, we did see one place that had big baskets of peaches, and we should have stopped then, but we didn't.
As we were coming into Hot Springs, we started seeing little camps set up along the creek here. It was obvious that Hot Springs was a major stopping point for the hikers along the AT. It was also a resting point for the traffic traveling along the twisty, windy roads of western North Carolina.
Creek Springs Tavern.
Outfitters.
Oh, okay.
Like the trail comes into town right there and goes out right there.
That's pretty neat.
This was a really cool little town. Definitely a spot you could stop and spend an hour or two.
She's angry today.
Just outside of Hot Springs, we started making our way up the mountain on a gravel road. We were going towards the Rich Mountain Fire Tower.
Wait,
Yeah, we're going down. We're not going up, Mom.
this is pretty.
Yeah, it is. Very
The Rich Mountain Fire Tower was originally constructed in 1932, and it was manned until the 1990s. It was completely rebuilt and redone in 2018. After we left the fire tower, we ventured on towards Paint Creek.
news from horseback riders at Paint Creek. Bet you this is the area that they somewhere.
Yeah.
Not this, but somewhere.
Paint Creek has a campground and several picnic areas and water access areas before it dumps out into the French Broad River. It also has several small waterfalls. We couldn't help ourselves but stop and get out, check this one out.
That was a good one. Whoa! Whoa! Wow! That was fun.
That was a lot of fun. And that's what, to me, that's the kind of stuff that makes these trips.
Yeah.
Figure out how to turn around.
We made our way all the way down Paint Creek to the river. This was obviously a popular spot.
We're going to turn around. We need to go back up that hill. I just wanted to see the river.
After finding a suitable place, we turned around and continued on our venture.
People are fishing.
After coming back out on Blacktop, it was time to stop and get some fuel. This was a really cool old country store. It even had free air. We were pretty close to the interstate here, and we decided with the long drive back, it was time to put an end to this adventure and make our way home. Over the last 6 days, we've traveled just over 500 miles of the Smokey Mountain 1000 in the Pisgah and Cherokee National Forest. We can't wait to get back and do the rest. On this trip, Deb and I set out with Alan and Nancy. Our plan was to make our way back down to Asheville, North Carolina, and get back on the Smokey Mountain 1000. We made it to Asheville right at rush hour traffic, but luckily we made it through pretty quick. Just south of Asheville, we got onto the Blue Ridge Parkway. Our plan was not to travel very far tonight on the Parkway and find us a place to camp along a Forest Service road. And this is where the true adventure began. We had run into our first closed gate. It was time to find a different place to camp. This was only the beginning to a long, long evening. Most of our travels along the Blue Ridge Parkway are often covered with clouds or fog. This time was completely different. The views were absolutely amazing. The Forest Service roads in this area that weren't gated had these signs: no roadside camping. It cited public safety and health as the reason why. We continued on down the Parkway, hoping we would get lucky and they would have forgotten to post one of the roads.
Finally, one that's open.
And it says rough road, which is what we like. Fudge.
We weren't having any luck as the Forest Service done a pretty good job at posting. We continued on checking every offshoot that we could find.
Well, it's because I don't tell her.
This particular road did have a few campsites, but all of them were full. We continued to travel on and search for a campsite into the night. After not finding anything in that area, it was back on the blacktop. We were all starting to get hungry. Desperate times call for desperate measures. It's time for dinner in the parking lot of a gas station. After watching the local police SWAT team a guy and then having a nice warm dinner, it was back on the road to find a camp. But this time we'd traveled all the way through North Carolina and found ourselves in South Carolina. Just over the South Carolina border, we found a Forest Service road that wasn't marked. It also hadn't been used for a very long time. It showed on the map that it was going to be a dead end. We were hoping there was a place wide enough at the bottom where we could at least set up camp for the night.
We know how to pick them, don't we?
The further down we went, the more dismal it looked. We finally found a wide spot, decided to call this home for the night.
Yeah, she said
After we got camp set up, we had some hot chocolate, sat around a minute to unwind, and then it was time for bed. The next morning was sunny, crisp, and cool. The sunlight going out was definitely going to show us what kind of mess we got into trying to get down in here the night before.
What are we making?
We are making apple, I don't know, apple pie? Apple pizza
Okay, for breakfast.
for breakfast.
Awesome.
After a delicious, warm, and sticky breakfast, it was time to get back on the trail.
Is that going to go over our...
Could be hard on our chin.
Here, pull up. One more. Go ahead. One more.
We made our way back up out of this trail without very many issues at all.
I didn't realize we came back in here this far.
We weren't on blacktop long at all before we found ourselves back on gravel Forest Service roads. If we had drove a little bit farther the night before, we would have found some really cool campsites. But when it starts getting late at night, sometimes you just take what you can find. This was one of the campsites that we found less than an hour from where we'd stayed the night before. It was obvious that it gets a lot of use. It was well off the road and right beside a really cool stream. The name of the stream just happened to be Reed Creek, and it was full of mica schist. The whole stream glittered.
All the amenities at home.
After checking out the campsite, we had to climb our way back up onto the road. There are several places along this route to stop and check out the creek and the glittering sand and other sights of nature. By this time, we had made it to Georgia following Forest Service roads through the mountains.
In the night.
40s tonight.
wildlife we've seen on the whole trip so far. Little grasshopper.
These trips never cease to amaze me. Yep, that's a mannequin with a BB gun. And another fun fact, Georgia has a tubing park complete with man-made snow. The shadows were starting to get longer and the sun was dropping further in the sky. We knew it was time to start looking for a campsite. We didn't want to be sitting up in the dark like we did the night before. We found this one. It was nice, but thought it may be a little too high in elevation and just a little bit too exposed. We decided to try to find another one. We found another Forest Service dead-end road, but it was looking a lot like the night before. We wanted a better campsite for this night.
We need to find this campsite right along that creek right there.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I love campsites. Oh, did you find something by the creek?
Maybe.
That was a good sight down over the hill, Bill. Get to it.
Trying to figure out how to get there.
That's what he's looking at now. It ain't on
I
purpose.
just told her, don't challenge him.
Yeah. That looks like it right there. But there's also a little Forest Service road right down here about 500 feet. So we'll look at that and then we'll come back to this.
Was there something that dropped off the edge?
Yeah, there's a road that went back down in there.
I should go down that road that you looked at, right, Bill?
Yep.
We were looking for another epic campsite by a creek. We found it. The morning of day 3, we got up, packed up camp, had breakfast pretty quick. We didn't stay at camp very long at all that morning. The adventure was far from over as we found the Tallulah River. This was another one of those rivers that we couldn't get over, just how pristine and clear it was. The route along this river goes for several miles and is absolutely breathtaking.
We had been on gravel or blacktop for much of this trip so far. It was good to see that we're finally going to be able to get on some dirt. But first, we had to do a little river fording. Once we made it through the river relatively easy, it was time to get the tires a little dirty. Well, this trail wasn't difficult at all. It was still nice to be on some dirt. The further we went along on this trail, the rougher it got. It wasn't terribly difficult. It definitely added a little fun factor to this section. At this point, I had my sway bar still connected. It probably would have made for a little easier ride had I went ahead and disconnected them. But up to this point in the trip, really didn't see a need to.
That would probably be pretty gross.
It's blacktop. It wasn't long before that off-road excursion was over and we were back on blacktop. Thankfully, this blacktop section didn't last very long, and we found ourselves back on gravel Forest Service Road. At this point in the day, we'd found ourselves getting hungry. We found ourselves a nice pull-off with an overlook and decided to grab some lunch. There are all kinds of little mountain touristy areas to stop and check out in this part of the world. The further we climbed in elevation, the more amazing the views became. The light was almost perfect. While the views on that road was pretty cool, we still would rather be off of the pavement. Seems like a lot of people just like to see how many miles they can put down in a day and try to get from point A to point B. But to us, the whole thing about overlanding is stopping and being able to see the sights. Take your time, enjoy your journey. And that's exactly what we did here by stopping and enjoying this amazing waterfall. By this time, the sun was starting to hide occasionally behind the mountaintops. We knew it was getting close to starting to find a place to camp.
Oh, to see anything.
We managed to find this really cool spot along the creek. It even had a walk bridge and a nice fire pit. While Nancy and Alan were getting the fire ready, it didn't take long for Deb to start cooking. We had another great meal, another cozy fire, and enjoyed the rest of the evening.
As we were driving along today.
So the next morning we woke up to realize that we had broken overlanding rule number 462.
Yeah.
Don't park next to a walking trail. Yep, that's right. Apparently we had camped where they were having a check station for a 20K run. We packed up, made a quick exit, and got out of their way. It was actually really good to get another good start for another full day, and the fog in the valleys was simply breathtaking. One of the things that we really like about traveling is being able to see different seasons at different times of the year. Down here in Georgia, middle of November, there's still some fall foliage colors. I know we've said this before, but you never really know what you're going to see when you're out exploring like this. We thought we were absolutely in the middle of nowhere. The next thing we know, we pop up at a military base.
It's pretty neat.
looked like they'd done a major upgrade and then
Just like that, you're back in the middle of nowhere.
It's running.
The majority of this day was also gravel and pavement primarily, but we did find a couple trails from here and there. And just like yesterday, it was getting late, but we found another waterfall, had to stop and check it out. It wasn't quite as dramatic as the day before, so we headed on about our way. And that's when we found this amazing mountaintop campsite.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
We couldn't have asked for a better spot to watch this amazing sunset. The next morning we took a little longer around camp. Not because we were being lazy, but we knew this would be the longest day since our first. This was going to be our last day. The plan was to go today until about 5 or 6 o'clock, almost till dark. Wherever we ended up at that point, we were going to get off the trail and hit the interstate and head home. This morning we took a small detour. We went to the Lake Conestoga recreation area, which was just off our normal route. Specifically, we wanted to check out the small mountain lake that was up here. It was definitely worth the detour. After we left the lake, we found this awesome mountain view. We also found quite a bit of garbage and some fellow Jeepers that were cleaning it up. So we decided to jump in and help a little bit. This is also where we met Jake and Nick and their families. They had been overlanding the Georgia Traverse for the last several days, and it just so happened that our paths were going to line up today, and we decided to all travel together. It wasn't long after meeting up that we all decided it was time for lunch. Not only to give us time to eat, but it gave us all time to hang around, get to know each other, tell some stories, and just generally have a good time. Within minutes of getting back on the trail from lunch, we crossed over into Tennessee. Today's trip didn't yield us any dirt roads, But that was okay. It was nice to ride along the gravel roads, talk to new friends, meet new people, and just see some of the views.
Just a little way.
As we traveled, we continued to chat on the radio and learn about everybody in the group.
Well, darn it.
Now there are garnets.
They did find garnets and all of these.
It's a little bouncy.
We came out of the woods just west of Parksville Lake. This would be where we stopped, aired up, and said our goodbyes for now. We know that these new friends are going to be people that we're going to travel with in the future, and surely look forward. We left Kentucky and made our way to Cleveland, Tennessee. This is where we will meet Mike and Laura to finish our adventure on the Smokey Mountain 1000. The plan was to pick up where we left off just outside of Cleveland and make our way all the way up to Interstate 40 over the next 4 days. It didn't take us long at all to get back into the Cherokee National Forest near Parksville Lake, where we had left off in November. This is where our new adventure would begin. The plan was to make the 400-mile adventure over the course of 4 days and 4 nights. The sunny skies quickly turned to gray, started giving us a little rain. We knew this was coming. We knew it wasn't going to last real long. We all decided as a group to drive through the rain, and then even if it was dark, we would set up camp for the night in the dark. While the rain wasn't real hard at this point, it was still cold enough outside. If you got wet, you'd be pretty miserable. By this point, we had put some miles on and we were starting to get close to the Ocoee River. The TVA uses this awesome river to generate hydroelectric power. They channel it from way up there.
I took a picture of the tube.
And they run it through turbines. It's one of the TVA hydroelectric plants. This is also the location where the kayaking events for the 1996 Summer Olympics were held. As it started to get darker, the rain started to pick up in pace. We were off-road at this point and enjoying the trip, but we were noticing a lot of downed trees in this area and knew that this was not going to be a good place to camp. We had to move a little farther. There were dead and downed trees everywhere here. There were places that people had cut their way through where trees had fallen. This particular area, we had to cut off a small section so we could get our Jeep under it. We're not sure if it was beetles or a fungus or what, but there had been something that sure killed a lot of trees in that area. As we continued deeper on into the Cherokee National Forest, we kept looking for a good place to camp and trying to wait out the rain. We checked several spur roads and just wasn't having any luck finding a suitable campsite. By this time it was dark and the rain was starting to pick up.
The way it looks, it could.
While it was not the awesome primitive site that we were looking for, we did find a National Forest Service campground that was empty, and we decided to stay there for the night, have a late dinner, and take off on to bed. The next morning we woke up to cool temperatures, but the rain was gone luckily. This was the Lost Creek Campground. It was actually really nice and had a cool stream running right beside it. This National Forest Service campground was really nice. It was one of the primitive ones. It had a vault toilet, picnic tables, camping pads. While it wasn't the awesome dispersed site that we were looking for, it certainly worked out for us last night. That morning we didn't get into a real big hurry. We just milled around the campground there, kind of exploring. Of course, we had to have some coffee, and Deb made some incredible homemade apple fritters for breakfast. After breakfast, we packed up and headed out. It was time to see what this day would bring us.
No thanks. I think we're okay.
I think he said he would need gas later.
It was getting to be around noon, and we would be crossing our next major waterway. This is the Hiawassee River, and it's famous for whitewater rafting here in eastern Tennessee. This particular area here is Reliance, Tennessee. It seems to be really rich in river history and a home for whitewater rafting.
Just outside of Reliance, we found ourselves back off the pavement. So far throughout this trip, we haven't seen anything difficult at all. Any type of vehicle could virtually do what we've done so far. The scenery was pretty nice though, and it was getting even better as we went. As we crested the top of this mountain, we could see off in the distance Whitecap Mountains. We knew that we wanted to find a way to get to where they were at and check them out. It was getting early afternoon. The Whitecap Mountains was going to have to wait a little bit. We found a spot for lunch. After a great lunch, it was time to make our way on Conestoga Creek. There are several creek crossings along this stretch of trail. Some of them are a little deeper than others. This was the deepest creek crossing that we went through, and probably wouldn't be that bad in the summer, but I could see it being a little bit deep in the spring or after a heavy rain. We finally made it to the last creek crossing on this trail. I knew a little bit about it because I'd done a little bit of research on these trails. As long as you stay to the left there, you're going to be just fine. There are some rock ridges just to the passenger side. As you'll see here, Mike hit him and bounced him around a little bit. I guess I should have let everybody in on my research. Next, we were back on Blacktop and finding our way closer and closer to the Whitecap Mountains. Deb and I have been looking at Guide GPS, and we have found a route that would get us to the top of the mountain where the radio tower was here to the left. We found our way to Gravel Forest Service Road, and we were getting closer and closer to the top of the mountains. As we got closer to the freeze line, we realized this wasn't snow. It was in fact frozen fog. It was something not many people get to see, but it was like going into a different world. After that incredible experience, it was time to head off the mountain and start looking for camp. We'd thought about staying on top of the mountain, but it was way too windy and way too cold to stay up there. We felt like we had better get down in one of the valleys where we were a little more protected. We wanted to try to be set up just a little bit earlier than we were the night before. The problem was we kept running into signs like these. Some places you just can't camp where you want to. You have to camp where they want you to. So we continued on in hopes to find a secluded, designated campsite. We finally made it to camp right at the edge of dark. We got everything set up, and Deb fixed an amazing homemade stuffed pepper soup. We sat around the fire enjoying a nice hot meal, and Alan even went for seconds. The morning of day 3, we woke up beside a really cool stream. It wasn't the epic dispersed campsite that we were looking for, but it worked out for us. While they were designated campsites, they were primitive, and we had the whole place to ourselves. By this point in the trip, we were starting to see a trend, and that trend would be that there was only designated camping in this area, especially in the winter when most of the Forest Service roads are closed. The other trend was this morning was cold, just like the last couple. We spent most of that time inside the OVS awning room, getting ready and eating. After we finished breakfast, we packed up and made our way down the Ocoee River.
Okay.
This drive is very scenic, and it's obvious that there's an abundance of water recreation in this area, especially during the summertime.
When we got to Tellico, we made a right. The plan was to go toward the Indian boundary area and Ocoee Creek.
They're steep, aren't they?
Yep.
Just like the rest of this trip, there was nothing difficult. We were able to find a little bit of dirt along the Forest Service roads.
Okay, so we have.
Conestoga Creek is another very popular waterway, and it's also very scenic. The road's not bad, it's gravel along it. There are also multiple campsites in this area. By this time it was getting later in the day and it was time to start looking for a campsite.
2 or 3 miles. I'm glad somebody else got that out of the way.
Yeah.
We didn't.
We found one that suited our needs. It was Mike and Laura's turn to cook dinner for the night. They made some most excellent chili.
So then after that,
The next morning wasn't quite as cold as the previous mornings, so we decided to sit outside rather than huddle inside the awning wall. While it wasn't quite as cold as the previous mornings, it was still pretty chilly. We didn't waste a whole lot of time around camp. It was time to get on the road and get in a warm vehicle. As we left the double camp area, the plan for today was to go see what the Snowbird Mountains were about. As we got out onto the mountain, we got phone service. This is where Mike and Laura found out that they had some issues back at home. They had a water leak and had to go home and take care of it. So that left Alan and Nancy and Deb and I to continue our expedition.
700 feet.
The further we climbed in elevation, the wider the ground became.
500 on mine.
The plan was to get away from Blacktop as quickly as possible. We were going to do that by way of this Forest Service road.
Not suitable for passenger cars.
Okay. I think
Yeah,
it's
but
gated.
it looks like
And
it's
this
gated
Forest
off.
Service route, just like many others this time of year in this area, was blocked off and we were forced to get back on the Blacktop. The only good thing about this was we got to ride along the ridge top of the Snowbird Mountains. It was very scenic up here. We finally made our way off of Blacktop and found our way to the metropolis of Denton. This is a very old settlement, and the population is noted as several. We found a nice pull-off on top of the ridge to stop and take a little bit of a lunch break. We were running this Forest Service road along the top of the Snowbird Mountains. The hopes was that it would continue for quite a while, but by the look of the map, it didn't look like it was going to be very long, and we were going to end up in the town of Andrews.
We were recording that.
After we made it through the town of Andrews, we found our way back to our old friend, the Nantahala River. This was just a new section that we had never seen before. After making our way up Otter Creek, we crossed over Tellico Gap. We were now in Tellico, North Carolina. This would lead us to our next river, the Tennessee River. We made our way out of Andrews, planning to take Forest Service roads over to Robbinsville. Again, the further we ascended, the wider the ground got.
Like a lot of people been turning around right there. I bet this gate's closed.
And just like a lot of the other Forest Service roads, we found multiple gates closed and were forced to turn around and make our way
And
back
there's
down the mountain.
gate.
We kind of considered camping up here, but if we get snow, depending on how much we get, it could be bad getting off here in the morning.
Or rain to ice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be even worse for sure.
After a brief discussion, we decided, even as picturesque as it was, the safe bet was to make our way back off the mountain and not camp up here for the night. Before we knew it, daylight turned to dark and we still hadn't found a campsite. We ended up at another primitive campsite from the National Forest Service. We pretty much had this one to ourselves too, but it's not the kind of camping that we prefer to do. These campsites were not far from Santila Lake. We woke up to rain that morning as the weather had predicted. It was a good thing that we hadn't stayed on top of that mountain because they actually did get ice and snow up there. We packed up camp pretty quick and set out on our last day's adventure.
That's cool.
It looked like today was going to be a lot of blacktop and very little gravel and dirt. As we were getting close to the touristy towns of Bryson City and Cherokee, and we were getting close to the Smokey Mountain National Park, which doesn't have a whole lot of off-roading in it. I did find us a couple places where we could get off the pavement and hope to find a little off-road adventure.
What do you think?
The only problem was the off-road adventure was covered with ice and snow.
Well, if it's slushy here, chances are it's frozen up there.
We're looking at this map, and if it's slushy here, we're questioning if it's frozen up higher because the elevation's going to rise.
We're going to be climbing another 1,200 feet.
We're going to climb another 1,200 feet. What do you guys think?
It'll be interesting, 1,200 feet. If we climb the whole way, okay. We have to go down the other side too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be knocking on 5,000 feet if we go this direction.
Yeah, we'll be up almost 5,000
We'll
feet.
be up over 5,000.
It'd be nice to know if there's ice under the snow up there.
I'm going to walk right here and just...
That's not a motion to check it out.
Yeah, he's walking on it to see what it feels like. Turn around.
It's not going to get any better going up.
So turn around.
A little slickety, huh?
Yes, it's a little slick, and it's not going to get any better with elevation. I think the smart thing to do is probably go ahead and turn around.
If it was just snow, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But there was ice underneath it, and I knew we would be gaining elevation. I found us another road up. I hoped it would be a little better. The plan was to get to Buzzard's Roost that overlooks I-40 before we made our way home. And again, we were stopped by another gate. At this point, we had no choice but to turn around. We were right at the interstate. We decided to call this adventure a wrap and make our way back home.
Bill was just telling me when he went to the hurricane, when he flew to the hurricane, on their way way back, they had to fly this valley back home because of the tops had too much fog.
This video concludes our trip around the Smokey Mountain 1000.
This route is not difficult at all for a four-wheel drive, but it does offer some of the most beautiful scenery that you'll find in the southeastern United States. Just like always, let us know what you think in the comments below. Remember, like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, see ya.